petrified that wasn't going to happen, but it did, it happened. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. The best little planet between here and Uranus. That distant, forlorn one. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to actually ask you to put your hands together in a big and exciting way for, I was pronouncing it with the Northcote accent, Siwan. But in fact, put your hands together for Shuan. Thank you very, very much. In fact, I think it calls for 3 cheers. Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! She's worth 4. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to take you for a stroll down Sustainability Street, which in the context of today's event is a template for people in our everyday lives to build and tell stories, I would argue. Stories about our lives, which are the ultimate direct and indirect link and threat to habitats, to species, to biological diversity. Ladies and gentlemen, the Sustainability Street approach is a mix of sociology, education, community building, and it is glued together with a dose of good old fun, not unlike telling stories. Because, ladies and gentlemen, if it ain't fun, and if it's not a good story, it's not sustainable. So, ladies and gentlemen, the approach has been informed by the literally hundreds of communities with which Vox has had the great honour and pleasure and privilege of working. The approach was also influenced by socialist, more of which later. The approach was also influenced by a sociologist, Robert Putnam. Putnam gave us the terms social capital and civic invention. He has been studying Western society since the 1950s, and he has catalogued the extent to which we are all cracking and falling apart, to which we are atomising socially. Clubs, parties, churches, groups, knitting clubs, you name it. He calls it a crisis at the heart of society. Putnam says that in America, there are more people who watch Friends, the telly show, than have friends. And ladies and gentlemen, perhaps in Australia the corollary would be that there are more people who watch Neighbours than talk to the neighbours. And this is, I think, Shoe on your foot said, this, I'm going to use that totally now. This is at odds. Not speaking to people, not being connected is at odds with our deep species being. We humans are actually hardwired to smile and to hang out together. We need it. For 10,000 generations, this evolutionary drive for companionship has been the cauldron of human storytelling. However, sadly, in these insane modern times, visceral face-to-face community relationships have been taken over by what I call the windscreen relationship. You know, a bit of a wave, a bit of a smile through the windscreen. If there's someone you really like, you might toot, wave, smile. And ladies and gentlemen, the wave, smile, toot as we drive by. Maybe it should be called the drive-by relationship. I'm not sure. Anyway, in the Sustainability Street approach, we've coined a term which is, you've got to leap the shy gap. You've got to leap across the gulf of shyness. Just suck it up and say g'day. That's what you do. And, as Shoe on your foot said, Shu-Ann said, as Shu-Ann said, we're going to get visceral. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there it is, testing. On your seat near you, you will find a streamer. And ladies and gentlemen, can you grab that streamer? Can I have one? No, you take the purple one. Ladies and gentlemen, please defer gratification. I'm going to tell you that this is probably a first for the BMW hedge. I prefer to rename it the Malvern Star hedge, but we won't go there. Ladies and gentlemen, in this room, gurus of fashion and culture, ministers of cabinet, captains of industry, and even this morning, Saint David Suzuki regaled us. And ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to ask you to do with this, which is hereunto known as the Shy Gap Eradicator, the SGE, or the Social Connection Enhancer, the SCG. Anyway, I want those who have got a streamer in their hands to stand up, please. Would you please stand up if you have one in your hands? And if you don't have one and you see one nearby, grab it and stand up. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in a second or two, I'm going to ask you to grab the tail of the streamer, the first time it has ever been done in the edge. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to demonstrate. The technique is to grab the inside tail, nice work, and on the count of 3, 2, 1, not yet, on the count of 3, 2, 1, I'm going to ask you to launch your streamer. I'll give you a demo, don't do this. I'll give you a demo. I'm going to ask you to launch your streamer out across the gathered throng. Try to get it even further. And then, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to follow your SGE to the first person that you make eye contact with and say, "G'day, g'day, how are you?" The second person with whom you make eye contact, please say, "G'day, what's your name?" Janusz, I'm Frank, pleased to meet you. Good to see you. And the third person, I'd like you to say, "G'day, what's your name? Tell me a little bit about yourself." And in fact, I'd like you to delve so deep, you end up with a PIN number. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please, grab the tail of the SGE. And what I want you to do now is to turn so that we're all facing totally different points on the compass. Go through 360 degrees. If all the streamers come down to me, you all already know my name. On the count of, are we ready? Tim. Thank you, Tim von Karate. On the count of 3, 2, 1, go! Hey!
You're the first person I made on camera. Hello. 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 Alison. That's Swedish. No, Helen. Oh, Helen.
Okay, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I am deeply apologetic. Ladies and gentlemen, this hurts me more than it hurts you because I happen to believe that a little bit of chat is the highest form of human evolution. I think you'd agree, Sharon. So, ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask you to release your friendship with another and make your way back to your seats. A bit breathless. Everybody breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in. As you make your way back to your seats, you're welcome to occupy some of the front rows. You're welcome to come down closer. Breathe in, breathe out. In, out. And make sure you keep doing that for the rest of your life. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, guess what? Big additional bonus in crossing the shy chasm. The science tells us that we are all now in this room better human beings after that. Our bodies are now loaded full of endorphins, gushing through the system. In terms of social science, Rhonda Galbally, who headed up the first Victorian Health Promotion Foundation, made the point that in fact, by building a degree of social connectedness, it is as good for health status as giving up fat, tobacco and alcohol. It makes you that healthy. And ladies and gentlemen, Professor Lisa Berkman, who is a US social epidemiologist, has suggested that enhancing social connection, bonds in community, can add 10 healthy years to lifespan. In terms of brain science, neurologically speaking, if you cracked a smile or had a giggle, you are now healthier, happier, cognitively enhanced, and 22.43% more creative. Which is perfect for crafting habitat-friendly stories and ecological sustainability solutions. I think you'd agree. Okay, let me get serious. I think there are macro stories and there are micro stories. The big, bad, modern, global macro story has been dig it up, use it, dump it. Dig it up, use it, dump it. As if the planet Earth is a limitless bounty of resources. The word resources, of course, being an Orwellian, insidious code for habitat. It has been a horrible macro story. However, as Shuan has said, so much power and so many more stories, other stories are possible. In a few moments, as I said, I want to take you for a stroll down Sustainability Street, which has enabled thousands of people to proudly, passionately tell another story. And have fun along the way, because as I said, if it ain't fun, it ain't sustainable. Have you had any fun here? Ah, good smile. Beautiful. Firstly, I wonder if I may tell you a wee story of my own about the origins of Sustainability Street. Are you ready for a story, boys and girls? Okay, once upon a time. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, back in 1972, this larger than life chappie here told us all an amazing story. He said that another completely different way of living was now possible in Australia. He told me personally, a working class lad from up Reza, that I could now go to university, even though Mummy and Daddy, bugger them, had not inherited enough for me to go to pay for it, to pay the fees. Goff's story changed the whole societal mindset in so many ways. His big story about change made so many things possible. New stories were fired up by the collective imagination. This is something, stories spawn stories, I think. Big stories and little stories. Stories spawning stories. Now, I'm going to get as visceral again if I can, because I just want to relive those days back in the 70s for a moment. I'm going to ask you two questions, and I want you to answer each passionately, proudly, insistently.